So mixing kick and bass is one of the most challenging things every music producer has to face, especially in genres like techno, house, EDM, and electronic music in general. But here's the good news, it doesn't have to be that hard. In fact, once you understand a couple of underlying principles, the ones that I'm about to show you in this video right here, then you will never ever have to struggle with this again. So buckle up, let's get ready for the ultimate tutorial on mixing kick and bass in Ableton Live. Don't worry, it's gonna work in any DAW whatsoever. The principles are the same, so let's jump right in. So let me ask you this, why do you think that so many music producers these days struggle with mixing kick and bass? The first thing you need to understand is that bass frequencies take up more acoustic energy than high end, meaning that kick and bass take up so much of the overall headroom of your session that if you don't get these aspects right and they work well together, you cannot make your music loud, it's not gonna sound punchy, your final limiter on your master chain is going to produce farting noises, distortions, and maybe even start pumping. And so all of these things can be avoided by tackling this the right way. But the second big issue is that so many producers have followed flawed advice over the years. So it's being propagated on YouTube in blog articles that kick and bass are fighting against each other and you have to carve out space in each of them so that the other one can shine through. And I think this is complete BS, because if those two elements are fighting against each other, something's wrong in the session way before it even comes to the mixing process. The goal of a great mix where kick and bass sound great together is that you have to find a way to make them work together organically instead of fighting each other. And I don't think that the solution is just carving out frequencies and doing some super strange tweaks, because in the end what you're going to do is you're going to completely destroy the character of any individual instrument. The whole mix is gonna fall flat, and to be honest, a lot of the tutorials that I've watched and listened to don't sound that great in the low end because of that exact reason, even if it's being shown again and again as the solution to kick and bass mixing. So I'm trying to address some of these issues in our session right here. Let's jump in and look at what we have. So I'm going to play this for you, and this is completely unmixed, so no effects on anything right now. It's a super raw session, and I'm going to hit play and just walk you through this. So as you can see, we have a kick group, we have bass, which is divided into a sub bass and a rolling bass. I intentionally made it difficult for myself, so I created a bass that floods the entire frequency spectrum with a super deep ongoing sub bass, as you can see here, and the rolling bass that's also playing 16th notes, so I don't trick you into anything like, okay, I made it super easy, so it's no wonder that the kick and bass sound great together. And here I just have a drum tops group. Now, you might be wondering why I am grouping everything in this specific way. And this is part of the reason why this is going to sound great later on. So make sure to pay close attention, because this is going to be one of the most important things you'll ever learn about mixing. I separate kick, bass, and drum tops very intentionally into separate groups, and here's why. Most electronic music genres like techno, house, EDM are designed to be played at club or festival settings, meaning the club system is going to produce acoustic energy that makes people move. If you now group kick and bass together, for example, and you compress it, you saturate it together, you maybe EQ it together, what you're essentially doing is you're taking away from that group, because the kick drum cannot really punch through, because obviously the bass signal is also influencing the overall compression and then duck down the kick a little bit in the moment where it actually wants to poke through. So in very few settings does it make sense to group them together, in my opinion. And the same holds true for drum tops and kick. So the kick drum is kind of providing the steady beat, but a lot of the stuff that's happening in the drum tops is offbeat stuff, syncopated stuff. And once again, if you compress and treat all of this together, you are taking away from the individual strength of these elements. Now, I'm a big fan of then on the master channel glue things together again a little bit. So it's not like I'm opposed to gluing things together, but I just do it purposefully at a very late stage and just a tiny bit. Okay, I hope that this was a first little nugget of wisdom. And in case you struggle with finishing songs, I have a free gift for you. It's called the Finisher Framework. You can get it at pickyourself.com/framework. Just like this video, I made this as helpful and valuable as possible, but it's still completely free. You can get it at pickyourself.com/framework. Now, let's get back to the tutorial. So when you listen to this, I bet you have tons of ideas of what you could do with EQing and compression and so on. Let me play this again for you. But what if I told you that there is one step before that is much more important? So before going into mixing, the big question that you have to ask yourself is, what about the source material? Is the source material even any good? Everything kind of works, but if you listen to the kick drum, especially together with the bass in solo, I think there's still some potential, and you might be wondering why I've muted this channel. Yeah, this is because I want to show you what happens if I infuse a second layer to the kick drum that just gives a little bit of character and helps it poke through. And by the way, I've made a video about this specific topic, about kick drum layering. You might want to watch it as well. So I have a punch layer, which is giving me the initial punch, and then a character layer. And in this other video, I'm showing you exactly how to split these things apart and also getting rid of a lot of confusion that is out there in tutorials. So let me add this in, just a tiny bit. Now, the exact amount depends on taste. You can also bring this other one down and have more of the character layer, but I think this infuses overall exactly that type of edge that is missing in the sound, and there's no way EQ or whatever else can infuse that. I could use a little bit of saturation to get a similar result, but it will still be different. The same holds true for the bass sounds. So I could, for example, go in and check this sub bass sample. Since this is ongoing, the only thing I could check is whether it's in key or not. I've already checked this because I know that the sample is in B minor and this top bass as well. But if, for example, you have a lot of melodies going on and your sub bass is completely out of tune, yes, of course, it's going to be hard to mix this in if it's like super crooked. With the rolling bass, the same thing. Like if this is not in key and doesn't work well with the sub bass, you have a problem. This is stuff that you want to check. But also, a lot of producers overlook one important thing, which is the envelope of the bass. So let's listen to just the rolling bass here. And together with the kick now. Works quite well. So this is the envelope that I've dialed in. Now, a lot of people just leave the standard envelope, which is something like this. And also they don't have separation between the notes. So let's say all of the notes were going a bit longer. So this is what I mean by adjusting the source material so it sits right. We want to make sure that the kick drum even gets a chance to poke through. And it doesn't really change the rhythm that much if you leave a little bit of space here and adjust the ADSR envelope shape. To be a bit more snappy. You want to dial in the individual sounds in the best way possible before even starting the mixing session. Once again, in context with everything. So let's get into some mixing techniques. And by the way, it's totally okay to mix stuff in solo because your mind can make up for the rest of the music. And of course you have to double check it whether it works in context or not. But don't let anyone tell you that you're not allowed to mix in solo. That is BS in my opinion. So let's solo this kick drum and listen to it. So the layers work well together. There's nothing I want to do on any individual layer, but what we can do here on the group is of course try out a little bit of compression and a little bit of EQing and maybe a little bit of saturation. This is the kind of standard chain that I would start with, and then you can think about adding more things if necessary. So let's check this together with the bass group. Think about what do we want to get out of this. So personally, I would like to get a tiny bit more punch out of the kick drum and see like how far can we get without even changing anything to the bass. Because if the kick drum works well with this busy bass, then we've done a lot of things right on the kick drum. And then maybe we can adjust the bass so it sits around the kick drum a little bit. I believe that in a genre like techno, for example, the kick is the king, but still I don't want any of the two to clearly win any fight between them. So let's use a standard Ableton compressor. Now with compression, it's relatively tricky because most producers compress too much and too quickly, meaning super high ratio and a very quick attack time and kind of quick to medium release time. They have to dial in a little bit of makeup so we see what's going on here. So it starts to feel super lifeless and doesn't really give me the punch that I want. If you want a punchy kick drum, what you typically do is you go for an attack time that's like a little bit longer and a very fast release time. And the ratio doesn't even have to be that high, so that's not a problem. So somewhere between 2 and 6 maximum maybe, but I think around 3 or so is definitely enough. So let's check this. So this sounds quite good in my opinion. So it's taken away around 5 dB and I'm adding 450, which is even less adding than what is taken away. And it still sounds louder, which means we've done a pretty good job. By the way, I've made a video on gain staging as well. That's worth checking out. There's a card somewhere here. This to me is a very nice way of compressing a kick drum. It's not too heavy. It still pokes through and we can move on to the next part. Let's now add an EQ. And by the way, I'm going to stick with mostly Ableton plugins because someone commented on one of my last videos, yeah, can you also do this with just Ableton plugins? So yeah, I will do this now and we'll see how far we get. So the EQ8 is kind of the go-to thing here. Now, a lot of producers would automatically apply a low cut and just get rid of the bottom end here. This does not necessarily have to be. Let's throw in an analyzer and look at what's happening here. So you might be wondering, why are we not getting rid of this low end here? Isn't that giving us any extra headroom? But the problem is that you're also introducing distortion if you just filter out aggressively. And this is not overly strange to have this low end here, especially in a genre like techno. If this line was going straight to like here, this would maybe be a good reason to get rid of this. But honestly, it doesn't have to be that way because without the EQ, it looks like this. With the EQ, like a slight change, doesn't even make that much of a difference here. So I don't really think that there's a reason to get rid of this. Yeah, but I feel that it's also losing a lot of that low-end impact, what actually in the club hits my stomach. And I don't want to get this just from the bass. I also want to have it from the kick. So this is where a lot of tutorials, in my opinion, give flawed advice because they tell you, yeah, get rid of this so you have enough space for this and that. But if it destroys the character of the kick drum that you intentionally chose because of a certain characteristic, it just doesn't make sense in my opinion. So we will get rid of that and instead focus on maybe giving us even more of the character that we already like. So one of my mixing philosophies actually is to enhance the beauty in things. So I listen to a sound and I think, okay, what do I actually fall in love with in the sound and how can I enhance it? So there's also flawed advice that tells you you should subtract more than add in EQing. I think this is also wrong because it just lets you think in errors instead of solutions. So yeah. I'm a big fan of also boosting and I have no problem with cutting, but there's like no hard rule around this. So I'm boosting around 100 Hertz here. The reason is because I feel that there's a lot of impact, extra impact that I want to get. And you can sometimes enhance what you're getting out of one frequency band if you decrease something really close to it. So these are like subtle details. There might be a cool opportunity to kind of bring a little bit of that low end down without doing an aggressive cut. So here, by using a low shelf, taking a little bit of that away, it's often a more transparent solution to the same problem. Yeah, so this, in my opinion, is very elegant. I really like it. Now, there's a discussion. Do you compress before EQing? Do you EQ before compression? It depends, I would say. If I had excessive lower end down here that I want to have filtered out, I would absolutely put the EQ before the compressor because otherwise the compressor would just react to this super heavy low end. But also the compressor would kind of bring down some of the changes, other changes that I liked in the EQ that I already did. So here in this case, where I don't have like massive problems in the sound, I can compress and then EQ afterwards. And sometimes you just have to wrap things. So a little bit of cutting before, then compression, then a little bit of EQing that lifts after that. All of this is okay. Once again, there's no hard rule around this, but try to make sense of your decisions, to try to be a little bit intentional and purposeful. And at some point, this is going to be an automatic thing that just happens. You don't overthink it anymore. Let's see if we can get some overtones going. A little bit of saturation might help here. And honestly, the Ableton Saturator is an awesome tool. I really like it. There's not many reasons to get anything else beyond that. So for kick drums, the medium curve is actually something that I really like. You have to always compensate for the gain, of course, because this is really aggressive. Now I could theoretically split this in different bands and only saturate a certain part of the frequency range, but if you do a little bit of subtle distortion, and you don't go super crazy on it, there's no reason to make it overly complicated and split it into different chains. Because, I mean, what it does essentially is it adds a series of overtones to the signal. And if you have the fundamental of your kick drum included in this overtone series, it's not the worst thing in the world because it's going to produce multiples of that. If you do it gently, that's absolutely fine. There's no reason to just split things and do it that way. You can sometimes get a little bit of extra headroom by adding a limiter at the end of your kick drum processing chain. So let's try that out and see if it gives us any benefits. So with limiters, normally I would use the FabFilter Pro L, but in this tutorial, I'm going to use mainly Ableton tools. And since Ableton also has a limiter that is okay-ish, I'm gonna use this one. And if I say okay-ish, I mean, I wouldn't use this for mastering maybe, but on an individual channel it's completely fine. You can leave the ceiling at -0.30, that's all good. I'm not a big fan of auto-release because typically it's not well reacting to fast transients. So I would actually go for something like 7-8 milliseconds, like really fast. If you get too fast here, then it's gonna distort in not always the pleasant way. And I'm only taking it away until I'm close to hearing audible, like bad distortion sounds. So maybe a little bit backing off. And obviously overall you have to compensate for the additional gain. You could either do it by adjusting the ceiling and then bringing this back again, or you just bring in a utility and compensate for the overall changes in gain in the whole chain. So I've grouped all of these effects together now, and let's hear a before and after. It is gain compensated here with the utility gain, maybe not to the 0.1 decibel, but the funny thing is it is pretty much identical level but still sounds louder, which is a good sign. So I've not done anything crazy with this and still it sounds much better. Let's now check this out together with the rest of the production. And these were just changes of the kick drum alone. So let's now walk over to the bass. So here's the bass in solo. Just the sub in solo. And the rolling bass in solo. So what I would do first is I would treat the sub because this is the thing that is most problematic overall. It's playing through like this. It's almost like one constant sound. It's very distorted, it has a lot of overtones, it takes up so much frequencies. You can test this out by, for example, looking at the span analyzer once again. One constant hum somewhere around 60 Hertz, which is insane. But I mean, overall, it makes total sense and it works in a track. So the first thing that I would typically do with this is to physically let it duck a little bit with the kick drum. And You can do this with sidechain compression. You can also do this with using an LFO tool. This is, to be honest, my preferred way because you have a bit more control. So you can use the LFO tool from X4 Records. This is one of the ones that I recommend. So I know this is not an Ableton plugin now, but honestly, you could also create something like this in Ableton with using this body here and mapping the LFO in here to the gain utility plugin. So that is also something that will work. For the sake of saving a little bit of time for you guys, I'm going to use the LFO tool. It's just a little bit easier. And I've already dialed in like a basic shape. If you hear some clicking sound, then it's probably because the edges of the curve are a little bit too extreme. You can also use Shaper Box, it's a good alternative. So let's listen to this together with the kick drum. And the cool thing is you can then even make it louder after this again because it's stacking it against it. I will now keep it the same level because I think it was a little bit too loud anyway. Apart from that, honestly, there's not much I will do to the sub bass. Like, why would I even cut anything here? Like, it is already heavily filtered, so this is one of the main tips I have for you. Is like, sometimes you just don't have to do anything and it's fine. Unless you figure out that there's a problem, but there is no problem right now. So let's head over to the rolling bass here. So the biggest issue that I have with the rolling bass is that it's somehow not really blending well together with the sub bass. So they are very, very separate in my opinion, and sometimes that's not a good thing. So here I would actually love a little bit of glue and smear. And also, yeah, I think it could also be a little bit more percussive, a little bit more rhythmic, and we'll see what we can do with that. So actually there's something you can do in terms of EQing that will help with this. Now, you can, for example, push the frequencies around 900, 1000, 2000 hertz, which is kind of the nasal tones. And this makes basses more prominent without getting in the way of lead sounds, for example. And it's also mostly below the click sounds of the kick drums. So let's try this out. So I'm exaggerating here. And here I would even say, okay, that is maybe a little bit excessive here. If we have a sub bass going on and we also have a lot of low end going on here, it's a good example where I would actually cut something. That's very funny. The EQ8 is very differently weighted. This is how they call it. So the measurement is a little bit different. So it looks more extreme here on the EQ8 than it actually is on the Span. But yeah, if you don't get any negative side effects, I would say we try it out and cut a little bit here. Yeah, so that helps the sub bass and the rolling bass work well together because they are kind of using different frequency ranges and complement each other instead of getting in the way of each other. So this makes sense, and it doesn't really take away from the energy and the grit and the character that the rolling bass infuses, because that is all living much higher. So if I want to glue them together, I can use the glue compressor. It's a very nice tool, one of my favorites inside of Ableton Live. You don't need any other glue compressor besides this one, to be honest, like for many, many years. Unless you're doing this professionally, then maybe you want some other options. So glue compression mainly works like this. You dial in a gentle ratio, something like 2:1. You use a kind of fast-ish to medium release time and a slow attack time. And then you just increase the threshold until a lot of the signal is being hit. I'm not talking tens of dBs of gain reduction, but somewhere between the 0 and the 5 dB gain reduction line. Actually quite good here. So if you want to be super gentle, it's just touching the needle, what they call it. In this case, I would actually want to glue it a bit more, so I will actually take more away. You can really hear how it lifts everything up and creates kind of a unified groove of those two elements. It's very, very beautiful. This is exactly how I love to use glue compression. So let's now listen to kick and bass in solo together. Do you hear the problem? To me, it sounds like there's a tiny bit too much low mid-range going on, too much low mid muddiness. So we'll use span once again, put it on the master channel. It's just a safety limiter, it's doing nothing here. Somewhere around here, I actually want the kick drum to poke through a bit more, but there's a lot of stuff going on the bass area. By the way, I've made a video on using analyzers as well. You can check it out here. Let's try this out by getting rid of a little bit of low mid-range and see if that helps us. So yeah, these are subtleties, of course, but to me this makes a total difference. I think that this helps us get the kick to punch through a tiny bit more. You can also be a bit more extreme with this if you only do it on the rolling bass channel. In my opinion, it was good to do it on the group because, like, we've already glued this together. If I then mess too much on the individual ones, it might take away from this again, so I actually don't want to move back at this point. I can try going a little bit further. And this is a good technique, by the way, to boost a little bit, figure out what you don't really like, and then take it out again. What I'm not doing is I'm not like carving out extreme space to just let the kick drum be there and be very analytical with this. It's just like I heard that there's too much mid-range overall, and I don't think that the mid-range is necessarily a bad thing in the kick drum. In all fairness, you also have to add a little bit of gain once again after you've taken something away. Now, when I listen to all of this in context, I feel that also the rolling bass needs to duck a tiny bit, and I'm going to use an LFO tool again, but I'm going to use it differently. I'm just going to give it like a very gentle nudge, so every time the kick drum hits, it's kind of ducking a tiny bit underneath it. And honestly, I want even more of that upper mid-range character, this nasal sound. We can do this once again with saturation or distortion. I'm going to stay with analog clip here. Very nice. This is what I like. It's much, much better than before. I think this punches through much more. And honestly, if you are really taking everything into consideration, you would also work on the tops group as well, and not just on kick and bass individually. So when I would be mixing this overall, I would jump between the different sections also and kind of massage everything until it sits right. And as you can see, I'm like not doing any crazy techniques. I'm not doing any crazy moves here. All of this is very subtle and to the point, but the kind of combination of all these subtle tweaks is then adding to the final result. So I'm just going to do a super rough version of that by using the glue compressor on the group here, so the drum tops group. Once again, like fast release time, slow attack time, gentle ratio. So here I'm only touching the needle. Little bit of EQ. It's quite interesting that we have something going on here. And with percussions, I like to actually emphasize this range of consonants in the human voice. So 2 kilohertz to 4 or 6 kilohertz. I might do it on individual channels, but here I'm just doing it on the group overall to just emphasize it a bit. Very nice. And also here with tops, sometimes you want to use a limiter or a clipper to kind of give you a little bit of extra headroom in the end. And you always want to do it in a more transparent way. I can show you just one of the tools that is pretty inexpensive, and this even has like a free version out there. Here you can see the Kazrock clip. I typically use one of these other modes, like the crisp one, but it's not part of the free plugin. So I think the smooth one, this is the one that's in the free plugin as well. And look at this, it's kind of taking away 4 dB and you almost don't notice it sonically, which is quite nice. I would not soften it too much because otherwise the percussions like don't really snap as much anymore. So this can be really nice to control a group overall before sending it then to the master bus. Now overall the percussions might be a tiny bit too loud. This is one of the last steps where I might touch the levels here. Now it's interesting, we've pushed all of it a little bit, but we've also compensated. Let's see what the limiter does here. So this is the final output limiter. We still have enough headroom, the limiter is not working. Before we now get into the final part of this video, which is kind of the master bus processing, something that I'm now giving away for you for free. If you got any value out of this video so far, then consider subscribing to this channel, consider liking this video, because this really helps me keep going. It would mean the world, and I would also love to read your comments. Now let's get into mix bus processing. So just to show you that in the end I actually like having a little bit of an overall glue, we'll put the glue compressor at the beginning of the chain before it hits the limiter. As you can see, this is working really hard. Once again, we set our glue compression, slow attack time, fast release time, gentle ratio. And you can see that it's here clipping already a little bit. If you engage the soft clip, then it's actually infusing a little bit of a classic soft clip saturation kind of thing. But to be honest, I want to have more control over it. If this is already running in too hot, you have two options. You can either bring down the individual levels, which is like the clean way of doing things, or you can play with this clipping and say, okay, let's use the Kazrock here again. Put this at the very first part of your chain. Now let's check this out. It's funny, if I'm now taking away some of the gain with this clipper, what you see is that here the glue compressor is not working as much, it's not clipping as much anymore. And if I then also adjust the out level until there's nothing clipping anymore, then we should be absolutely safe, and we just gained us a little bit of headroom. Now obviously a lot of that clipping is on the output stage, so you can also just leave this as is and just bring down the make up, because like I said, the clipping is happening on the output stage of this. Also, this is maybe a tiny bit too extreme. Let's dial this back a bit. So I'm gently clipping here. And then of course I can go in using EQ once again. Let's see what we can do here. I would like to open this up a little bit. Yeah, I actually like to use a bell curve as well. Sometimes the shelf curves are just a bit too harsh, I think. One thing that I don't like about the EQ8 is that like it's it's so fiddly in a way, and you make huge moves just by moving the tiny dots a little bit. It's not my favorite EQ plugin, I have to be honest, but it definitely does the job. So it's not like it's sounding bad. I just don't like the handling of it as much. So I would go for the FabFilter Pro Q3 if you can afford it, or what I definitely have been using lately is the Kirchhoff EQ. If you want a comparison or you're interested in what EQ plugins I like using apart from the Ableton stuff, then leave a comment below. Now, let's check our final limiter again. The final limiter for me is the FabFilter Pro L2. I think this is really a good investment because the Ableton limiter just doesn't handle like full mix bus processing as well, in my opinion. So this is the thing where I will definitely deviate from the just use Ableton stuff. I mean, 2.5, 3.5 dB of gain reduction is not a lot, and we're already at -9. We could push it much higher if we wanted to. Now it starts to distort a little bit, but we're taking away 6 dB, which is a lot. And bear in mind, this is just kick, bass, and a little bit of drum tops. So normally you would also have lead sounds, you would have like more complex sounds overall in your session, and this would also help with the overall loudness if it's done right. Yeah? And then you will only use a tiny bit of limiting in the end, and it will still sound very, very loud and land at something like -8 LUFS or something, depending on how far you want to push it. In some EDM genres, you go to -6, and stuff like electronica is a bit more relaxed, and you can keep it at -10, -9, -12. So this is how everything sounds after mixing all the processing. This is before any processing. So I hope you got massive value out of this video. Let me know in the comments below what you found especially helpful, if you have any follow-up questions, and also I'm super happy to hear your suggestions for new topics. I'm happy to talk about anything that you guys find interesting. So leave a comment below and I will see you in the next video.